get a view on what's really going on here. Niren Tolsi is a senior journalist. He's been covering the Judicial Service Commission, well, for longer than I have, which is a very long time. Niren, good afternoon to you. I really appreciate the time. So we have claims made, no actual substantiation. We have things going on Twitter at the same time. In your view, what's really going on here?
There's a lot of politics, obviously, underneath the surface. What a lot of people have been calling undercurrents. But I think the first thing to establish is that these interviews are forensic interviews. So generally, the Judicial Service Commission, when it sits, the questions are based on fact, on evidence, complaints, objections, etc. Now, in the case of Judge President Mlambo, these are rumors that were put to him. Now, I'd asked Darlene Pope, who's the spokesperson of the JSC during the lunchtime press conference, whether Mlambo had been forewarned and whether this was necessary. Because in 2010, when the JSC was chaired by Sandile Ngcobo, there was a ruling he made when one of the JSC commissioners had raised an issue around a rumor of overcharging by one of the candidates. Now, there was no source to that rumor. At that time, Ngcobo disallowed the question because there was no substance to it, and also because and he made a ruling that any adverse commentary had to be put to the candidate before the interview so that they could prepare. Now, in this instance, this did not happen. And Advocate Mpofo, during the lunchtime conference, suggests that, look, I mean, these forewarnings usually only happen in cases of complaints or objections. But as you can see from the 2010 ruling by Sandile Ngcobo and the protocol that's developed over time, I mean, usually you would have these kind of procedures, because essentially you can ask a question on a rumor without forewarning, but you would need on a substantive issue where there is evidence to warn a person. That just seems illogical. Yeah.
So, I mean, what's basically happening, you're saying, is that there's a standing rule on how these issues are supposed to be dealt with.
There's a protocol.
There's a protocol.
Yeah.
Okay, a protocol is something that the person going to be interviewed really expect.
Yeah.
And you're saying that protocol hasn't been followed or has been...
Well, sometimes you need a more vigilant chairperson than may be the case in this instance. And it may also be institutional memory loss, because the JC changes over time. There are new administrations, and so you have new commissioners. So that may be one instance. The other thing, which is a more nefarious and sinister aspect to all of that, is that Judge President Mlambo suggested that these rumors started circulating to poison his candidature, to undermine his candidature for this role. I think that maybe these rumors started for a much more nefarious end. There have been constant unsubstantiated attacks against the Gauteng High Court, especially the North Gauteng High Court, because that's where a lot of because Tshwane is our administrative capital, that's where a lot of the political cases end up. And we've seen from the Public Protector and the CR17 campaign funds issue all the way through to kind of, there's so many of them. In a lot of these political cases, what happens is there's a social media campaign around it to discredit the judges, to suggest that they are in the pocket of the CR17 campaign, to introduce the ANC factional politics into the judiciary, etc. All of this has been unsubstantiated. So, I mean, is this about undermining the Judge President, or is it about actually undermining the judiciary as a whole, and specifically the North Gauteng High Court?
So, I mean, whatever happens with Judge Mlambo, he's going to remain a judge, I mean, unless something dramatic happens, because either he'll become the Chief Justice or he'll stay as Judge President. So either way, if someone wanted to, hypothetically, discredit the judiciary, this would be the perfect platform to do it.
And they could keep doing it, because what we've also seen is there's been a whirlwind of social media activity. Again, unsubstantiated, very much out to discredit, firstly, the judiciary, and secondly, the Constitution. And we're seeing some of that commentary on social media. Again, a disinformation campaign, which is now being echoed and reproduced in commentary within the Judicial Service Commission. There was a stage where if you had, for example, if there was a criticism of a judgment or of a judge, you would know where that source of that criticism came from, whether it was an academic criticism, whether it came from a media house, etc. Now we seem to have this conflation of social media, academic commentary, where you're not sure whether this is coming from somebody who's studied the law and has a background in attempting to understand constitutional issues, or whether it's just some bot on Twitter just kind of sprouting disinformation. Because we've seen this in a lot of instances involving certain factions within the ANC.
I mean, so in other words, because what is supposed to happen, and you started off by making the point that this is a forensic process.
Yes.
So, I mean, it takes us back to the whole conversation about that they're not very definite criteria.
Yeah.
But because what we seem to have is politics, on your version, coming through here, the forensic nature of this is lost, and it becomes, it seems, political. But I mean, the Judicial Service Commission, by its nature, is a hybrid body. It has judges, legal people, and politicians.
Yeah. But what we're seeing more of now are these unsubstantiated political campaigns which are being articulated within the JSC. I mean, if there's evidence, if there's substance, please bring it to the JSC, because I mean, we cannot have a situation where it later transpires that the Chief Justice is actually a success, But if you don't have any evidence, then how do you manage that information or disinformation, I suppose?
I mean, there's an old political example for years in Europe, for example. If someone really wanted to discredit an opponent, they would ask the question, when did you stop beating your wife? In other words, and the point about it is that there's no evidence, but one way, whatever the answer you give, you're in trouble. I mean, this seems to be an example of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, that's certainly the case. And, I mean, I think specifically with some members of the JSC, there seems to be issues around the CR17 campaign fund matter. I mean, we're reaching. There used to be a point where the JSC and the members of the JSC voted and conducted themselves by their conscience. Their conscience guided how they acted here. They didn't represent particular. They came here representing constituencies, but they acted with their conscience. That seems to be eroded over time. I mean, there's certainly been caucuses that have existed within the JSC over time. There was a period when Jeff Khadebe was the Justice Minister, where he whipped. Where there's a tightly whipped ANC caucus that was very evident there. I mean, we saw how certain judges were promoted, how certain lines of questioning were allowed. For example, the really awful instance involving Deputy Judge President Mojapelo a few years ago, etc. So I mean, this is. It's how do we rein that in? And I think what one needs now is a very strong Chief Justice who's going to be able to kind of like change the profile of the Judicial Service Commission and how it acts.
Niren Tolsi, I really appreciate the time and the experience. Thank you very much indeed. Niren, senior journalist, been focusing on the judiciary for many, many years and the Judicial Service Commission, as you can hear from what he said and from